Welcome back to another episode of the Emetophobia-Free podcast, and I'm so excited today because we are joined by the lovely Meg Lewis. Hi Meg, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
Good, I'm good, thank you. Now Meg is from arguably, in my opinion, one of the most beautiful parts of the world, which is the Lake District in Cumbria, in England.
I have to agree.
Yeah. And she's here today to bust a myth for us, and it's actually a myth that holds a lot of people back, and we get a lot of inquiries about it at HQ. And it's the myth that if I have ASD, I'm going to really struggle to overcome emetophobia. Yeah. And Meg has ASD, and she's overcome her emetophobia, so she's here.
There you go. You got proof number one that it was possible.
Which is awesome. So I'm going to dive straight in then, Meg, if that's okay. So do you want to explain the reason that you wanted to come on the podcast today? Yes. And then we'll dive into your story. So what was the reason for you being here today?
So basically, I found Thrive back in 2019, and obviously it's 2024 now. So it's been a 5-year journey to sort of overcome it. And the main reason it has taken that long is the doubts that can I overcome it because I'm autistic? And this idea that, there is so much discourse surrounding autism with the whole you are wired differently and you can't do things the same way as neurotypicals can. And obviously when we're talking about Thrive and we're talking about sort of changing your mindset, changing the way you think, and obviously autism is so heavily linked with the way you process information and stuff, I had so many doubts that I would be able to overcome emetophobia whilst being autistic. And so I wanted to do this podcast episode so that anyone who's listening who has also been giving themselves a hard time or really not been able to fully commit, having these serious doubts, can hear this and be like, oh, I can actually do it, because you can. It's literally has nothing to do with your ability to overcome emetophobia or not. It's just like, this is something that I really needed to hear back then. So that's the main reason why I wanted to be here today.
And we've got to thank you for that. We've got to really thank you for that and taking the time to do this today, because it's such an important message. Yeah. And you are right. People with ASD, they are powerless. A lot of time feel powerless about how their mind works and, wired differently. And therefore I can't, I've got very rigid thinking, therefore I can't overcome it. But we'll talk a little bit as we go through this podcast about why that's not true and why we can use the tools in the Thrive program. And actually, ultimately, when you have ASD, because of your hyperfocus and your black and white thinking, most people with ASD actually find it easier to go through the program than people without it, which is, complete contrast to the typical belief that you're going to struggle. So let's start right at the beginning. So when were you diagnosed with ASD and how did it impact your life, your childhood?
So I wasn't diagnosed until 2019. So what you'll realise listening to this is that my discovery of Thrive and my discovery of ASD happened almost like simultaneously, which also added to the delay because I was discovering two sides to me. So sort of growing up for me, primary school, it didn't really show too much. I mean, as a young kid, there were sort of things like sensory stuff I struggled with, or like I would have certain like soft fabrics that I would like cling to, sort of that sensory sort of thing. Things like going to nursery. If I turned up and I was one of the first one there, I'd be fine. But if I turned up and it was already busy with people, I would struggle to leave my parents. I just wouldn't want to do it. I always struggle to look people in the eye when I'm talking to them. And I remember distinctly my mum saying, Meg, you need to look at people in the eye because they're going to think you're rude. And I just couldn't do it because as soon as I look at someone and they're talking to me, I actually can't process what they're saying. I have to look away. Yes. So sort of things like that. But it didn't really show too much until I hit secondary school. And that transition from a primary school with about 80 pupils to a secondary school with over 1,000, I just could not cope. So I don't think I even made it a full week in secondary school. And then I was homeschooled for the best part of 2 years. I worked with a home hospital tuition service to help get me back into school. So it was kind of like a gradual return.
Okay.
So by the start of year 9, I was back in full time. And it's just like little things, you know, growing up, my interests didn't align with other teenage girls. You know, I was very much like, oh, Lord of the Rings, fantasy. And they were like, makeup and, you know, it's like, I just not on the same level here. And I was very, cricket has always been a massive part of my life, playing it, growing up. And I was so very much like a tomboy sort of, you know, persona. And I definitely struggled in certain environments. But as well, because my emetophobia, I've had that for so long, even though I hadn't spoken about it or even understood it properly myself, I knew that was holding me back more than the other stuff. And I knew that I was avoiding certain things, and, you know, whether it was like going out or eating stuff or whatever it is, the main stuff that was holding me back, I knew wasn't ASD. Obviously, growing up, I didn't know about ASD at all. No. So it was kind of just, I grew up thinking I'm just an anxious person. But that's, you know, I was treated for general anxiety so many different ways, whether it was therapy or acupuncture, or, you know, so many emetophobes will be able to relate to using or trying different methods to overcome it. But yeah, so the autism, looking back now, I can see it. And looking back now, my parents can be like, oh, that makes so much sense. That makes so much sense. But obviously, at the time, another one of the reasons why I wanted to do this is that there's not a lot known about autism in females. And even the stuff about autism for guys is still heavily stereotyped in TV and media. So it's no surprise that growing up, we didn't know that it was autism. So yeah, that's kind of like growing up with the autism, that sort of explains my sort of experience with it, I think.
Great, okay. So you said you'd had the emetophobia for a long time as well.
Yes.
So when did that occur? When did that start? When you noticed that?
So I would say I had emetophobia for anywhere between 15 and 20 years. I noticed it started in primary school. So again, in my head, I feel like I've had both of them for as long as I could remember. Like that's how I was going into this year, sort of thing. It started though for me, I didn't really, wasn't really bothered about myself. It was more other people. So as soon as and I think that ties in with a lot of people's worries about sensory issues, because, you know, being sick, it's not particularly pleasant, especially from a sensory point of view. So if you have sensory struggles, you know, that's one of the things that played on my mind is that, can I overcome it if I have these, you know, sensory stuff? So it's no surprise really that it started out maybe related to other people and not necessarily myself. And then obviously over time, as we know with emetophobia, the way that you process, you know, things with your limiting beliefs and your limiting beliefs and coping skills, it just got progressively worse. My story is it dips and changes a little bit. So I worked with a psychotherapist for up until the start of this year over the course of 10 years. And when I first went to see him, I had severe OCD. And the OCD came off the back of trying to cope with anxiety. It was my brain's only way of coping was to create this very restrictive, you know, a lot of people will be able to relate to this, but, you know, I would get up early in the day and I'd be the first person up and I'd still be the last person to leave the house. I'd be late every day because of the amount of, whether it's tapping or counting or redoing stuff, it took over my life. So my parents were like, we need to get this sorted. So I went and started working with a psychotherapist, and my confidence actually over that time grew. And by the time I was 17 or 18, I had emetophobia still, but it wasn't impacting my day-to-day life. And I was quite confident. I was socializing more. I was going to house parties as you do that age. I actually went to New Zealand with a school friend for 6 weeks, which like, you know, blew my mind. And I remember being there and going, this is what it's about. This is where I've worked to get to this point. And that was sort of 2017. And then 2018, I had a couple of uncomfortable experiences related to emetophobia and then also just anxiety in general. And those foundations that I'd built were actually very weak and they just came crumbling down. So I suffered a mental breakdown at that point. I mean, that 2018 was a rough year. So for me, it was, I just became a recluse. I was just in the house all the time. Sometimes I couldn't even leave my bed. I remember vividly my mum's 50th birthday, and she opened all of her presents in my room, sat on my bed because I couldn't move. And I remember another time she tried to help me into the garden and said, let's try 10 laps around the garden just for some fresh air. I think I managed 7, and then I collapsed. And this is where the emetophobia kicked into a new gear. And this is where I realized that actually the driving factor for all of these struggles that I've had with anxiety is actually emetophobia. And this is when I started to research it and give a name to it.
Yes.
So I realized I'd known for years and years and years that I had this fear, but it wasn't until 2018 when I realized that this is taking over everything. I mean, at that point, I wasn't really living. I was just surviving. I was trying to get through each day because the level of panic that I was experiencing was just, you can't describe it to someone who's not experienced it. But so for me, that was when I was like, right, okay, there's this thing, it's called emetophobia. I know that this is what's driving it. And I think that is when I sort of spoke to my mum about it. And I said, look, I know that we've talked about different stuff and I've skirted around the topic, but this is it. And the social anxiety had kicked in because you realize that all of these restrictions are linked to just this one small, unimportant thing, but it's ruining my life. And so, but we did have that conversation. And so even though I'd had it for 15 to 20 years, it was only at 2018 when I was like, no, I went from a year before being in New Zealand and being quite independent to no life at all. I'm in the house, recluse. I can't do anything. Everything gives me anxiety. So it was quite a big change in the space of a year.
Definitely. Okay. So when that occurred, then had you told Mum before? Did she know that you were scared of being sick? Had you had that conversation before, or was it very much no, actually, I didn't know whether it was my ASD or whether it was emetophobia, or I didn't have a name for it at that point. I didn't know what was driving it. And it was only at that point you realised what was driving it and could have that conversation. Or was Mum aware before that?
This is the complicated bit because I still hadn't been diagnosed with autism at this point. So we still didn't know that this was a thing. And I had touched on it a few times. I think because the last time that I was sick, I was 11 years old, and it was the summer holidays before joining secondary school. So obviously when I struggled with that transition, and anybody who has anxiety knows a lot of the time, nausea is a symptom.
Absolutely.
And I think because it'd been so close to since when I'd sort of been ill, I think we touched on it slightly when I was that young, but obviously it was like, oh, it's just anxiety. You're just feeling a bit, So it's one of those subjects that we'd skirted around a few times and talked about it a few times. But obviously anyone who's not emetophobic won't understand just how much it's driving your thoughts day to day. And I don't think I admitted it to myself until that point. So I think that was kind of the point where I was like, no, Mum, this is really, it's causing everything. And it's not just this sort of side problem. It's actually the root cause of everything.
Right.
So yeah, I think we touched on it, but not really, I hadn't really accepted it and I hadn't really explained it.
Fine. Okay. So at that point you've explained it, but you haven't been diagnosed with ASD. You have a name for emetophobia then.
Yeah.
What were the next steps in the story? Did you find the program at that point? When did you get diagnosed with ASD? How did that next phase unfold?
So I had been working with my psychotherapist at this point probably for about 5 years. And when I'd had that mental breakdown, this is when he sat me down and said to me, have you ever thought that you might be autistic? And I hadn't considered it. And he said he'd had suspicions through the years working with me. He said, the reason why I hadn't voiced it until now is because you were making steady progress. And I was like, even if this is true, what benefit would it be for you? Obviously, in the space of that year with everything that happened, he's like, no, I think we really need to dive into this. So anybody who's waited on the NHS waiting list to get diagnosed will know it is lengthy. I mean, for me, I think it was a year between being referred and having my appointments and diagnostic assessment and everything and getting diagnosed.
That's quite quick, relatively, isn't it, for young
quick.
people?
Yeah. So it was lengthy, but not as lengthy as a lot of people.
Yeah.
So I think, so that was happening. And then simultaneously, autism mode and research, because I decided, right, the emetophobia is a thing. It is driving everything. I went into like, what is this? Cure, find a cure, find a cure.
Yes.
And that's when I found the Thrive program.
Okay.
So it's worth saying at this point, whilst I was going through the autism diagnosis, I was also doing a lot of research for that. So it was like two things at the same time. And with the autism, I was like, yeah, I relate to that. Not that. Not that. That a little bit. Okay, I relate to that. It was a bit like that.
Okay.
When I found the Thrive program, I was like, this guy is inside my head. I was like, how is every single point of this program like relatable? It's the first thing that I'd found, all the treatments that I've been through where I was like, no, this is hitting every single nail on the head.
Yeah.
So once I'd got that autism diagnosis, which was like late 2019, because I was 21, that was a light bulb moment. Yeah. I thought, great, that explains so much. Yep. But then also the other side of it was like reading the Emetophobia program. I was like, that explains so much too. So I was like I had this internal battle in my head as, what's emetophobia? Yes. What's ASD? Are they linked? Is there a crossover? And it was a really challenging time. And after the ASD, I had that feeling of euphoria because it's like, oh, that explains so much. It opened a lot of doors for me in terms of support. But that's when the doubt started creeping in because I'd read the program and I thought, right, I can do this. I can nail this, because I knew that was the driving force between all of my limitations. Like I knew that the ASD stuff was there, but reading all the ASD stuff, it's like, well, I can cope with that. I can live with that. That's just quirks. That's just who I am. It was the emetophobia that was holding me back. Yeah. But at that point, obviously, I had the light bulb moment, oh, I'm autistic. And then suddenly it was hit with that, oh my God, like, am I going to have these struggles for the rest of my life? Like, and that's when the doubts started creeping in, because all of the research I did, I was astounded by how, I don't want to say negative, but the discourse surrounding it is very much you're wired differently and you can't do these certain things. And people sharing their difficulties and challenges, which is great because the neurotypical population need to better understand our experience. Definitely. But at the same time, as someone who's trying to find hope, I was like, God, this is just struggle after struggle after struggle that people are talking about. Like, how am I going to cope with this? Yes. So at this point, I had the Thrive program and I was really like hyper-focus mode. I want to do this. But those doubts had also started to creep in because I was like, right, I'm autistic though. So will this work for me? Yes. Okay. So at that point, it was only 24 now. It was the beginning of 24 that we got in touch with each other, wasn't it? Yeah. So it's only the beginning of this year. And what do you remember when it was this year? April. I think April. Okay. So April this year, you got in contact with me, and that was one of the first things that you asked me was, can I do it? Can I do it with ASD? And this podcast, I won't tell you the answer because this podcast is the answer. Right? So you've already beautifully explained the answer. And I also put you in touch with another lovely lady that I'd worked with who was, had ASD and had overcome it. And, I think that helped as well with somebody else, another voice. But this podcast is going to be beautiful because it's going to be in the public domain, so everybody can access your story, which is just phenomenal. Now, when you said you had the program and it all made sense, so you were going, yes, that's me, yes, that's me, yes, that's me, I get it. And it's a lovely feeling of, whew, isn't it? Yeah. Having challenged the belief about ASD after having the conversation with myself and with the other lady and discussing why the program is actually beneficial when you have ASD. And I think one of those main reasons is that it gives a name to things that are completely abstract. So people with ASD sometimes struggle with
emotions and feelings and understanding them and what's going on, understanding their own mind. And suddenly you have this program in front of you that's giving stuff a name, and it's really pointing out patterns, and it's going, okay, well, this is what this is, and this is what's happening and what you're doing. And suddenly all that abstract stuff that's like a big mess of, I don't know what's happening inside my head, there's just thoughts after thoughts, and it's just too much. You can suddenly go, oh, I've got a name for that. I can label that, and I can label that, and I can label that. And suddenly once you can get that self-insight and that education around your own mind and how you're thinking, you can then do something about it, which, you know, for neurotypical people is helpful, but for people with ASD is incredibly helpful. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think there's a reason why so many autistic people go into psychology and study it.
Yes.
It's because we want to understand our own experience better.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's what the Thrive program does. It's like it kind of opens things up, puts names to stuff. And, you know, it's because we love rules so much. We love meaning and finding it. And so we're just reading like, oh, that causes that, that causes that, that causes that. I can see it now. And that was a really, really beneficial part of the program.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So went through it on your own, had actually made some progress when we started working together, but then really picked up through the program, and you've absolutely smashed it now. You're doing things that even at the beginning when we started working together, I was like, whoa, Meg, hang on, which is just amazing. So do you want to talk us through from possibly April this year and when you fully understood the program and were starting to really implement it and getting those questions answered and those doubts answered? Once you were able to move past that doubt, how did things accelerate for you? Because that was a hurdle for you, wasn't it?
I mean, I think it's quite amazing how much that doubt was holding me back, because it was in our initial consultation that I said, right, this is the concern I have. And I remember the relief that I had. Like, I actually remember holding back tears at the point. I was like, don't cry in front of this woman. Don't cry in front of this woman.
You can cry there, go ahead.
But because the thing is, I knew it. I knew deep down already that wasn't going to hold me back. It's a really weird thing to know that, but also still have that doubt. But at the same time, I suppose that perfectly reflects emetophobia. You know, it's not scary, but I'm terrified. So why am I terrified? So it kind of measures up there.
It does.
So one of the things that, if people are still listening to this and have doubts, one of the things that I did that would really helped was look at all the progress I've made in my life, the ups and downs. Like, that is not static. That's not, that doesn't just stay constant. I can cope with things better. And then there were times when I couldn't cope with things.
Great.
If autism prevented you from making progress, you would not have those peaks and troughs. You just wouldn't have it. You just wouldn't be able to make any progress at all. And that's not the case. And then I also looked at my own history and I was like, right, because I've not been sick since I was like 11 years old, you know, but my mum, and I remember this myself as a kid, I just got on with it. I didn't care. It wasn't particularly pleasant in the moment, but like, I didn't make a big deal of it. My mum was like, oh, Meg's so great when she's ill. She makes no fuss. It's like over and done with, you know. I was like, if I could cope with it as a kid, like, I can cope with it as an adult. And obviously if I coped with it as a kid, even though I didn't know I was autistic back then, you know, I was.
Autistic,
so, you know, if autism meant that I had emetophobia and couldn't overcome it, that doesn't explain that. Correct. So I found all these little tiny bits of evidence that were like, actually, you know, I can do this. But I think because I'd created that limiting belief about being autistic for so long up until that point, I still needed that little bit of help of, no, you can overcome it. And just hearing that, I think that then opened the floodgates and I was like, right, I'm 100% in.
Yes.
And also for me, like you're saying, I had made a lot of progress up to that point. And I think what became apparent when we had our first session is that I intellectually understood the program, like back to front. Like, I knew the majority of it. The issue I had was obviously just tweaking certain bits to get it. And I had put off working with a Thrive coach for so long because I knew I was so close. And Rob himself has said this in the past, that so many emetophobes will buy the manual and put it under their bed, or they will, you know, they would rather live with the hope that there is a solution there rather than try it and fear of failure. And I think for me, I was like, if it doesn't work with a Thrive coach, what the hell am I going to do? So I'd put that off. And I was like, right, no, I need to do it. And I was like, I still didn't know how you were going to like make it work. Obviously, I made it work, But like, I was like, how, because I knew the program so much. I was like, what can you tell me that I haven't already read that's going to make it go like that? So if anyone else has those doubts, what I'll say is that is not your job to worry about. That is what the Thrive Coach is there to do. If you knew the answer, you wouldn't need the Thrive Coach. You need to speak to someone who hasn't got those, those shades, those lenses on. Because what became apparent from working together is that we just tweaked certain things. There was no big change.
Nope.
And what I can liken it to is if you're hiking up a mountain, plenty of them in the Lake District, and you get to a false summit and a false summit and a false summit, you think, God, like, maybe I'm never going to reach the top of this mountain. But actually what you don't realize is that you are on the last false summit. The next one is the real thing. And that's kind of where I was. I just wasn't fully getting up there. So yeah, I actually can't remember what your question was now. I've kind of gone off on a tangent.
I'm not sure I can remember, to be honest. But it was a very good tangent. So I think we were just talking about your progress since we started working together. And once it was the limiting belief you had that I can't overcome this with ASD, or I might not be able to overcome it. And once that belief had gone, and once you'd moved past it, what was the progress like and the journey like from that point?
And it was a lot more stable then. It wasn't as much up and down. I think I knew coming into working with you that the main thing I needed was someone to hold me to account, because I would hyper-focus mode for 2 or 3 weeks and then get on with something else. And I'd still think I'm doing it, but not quite doing it. And then, like I said, there were several times when I thought I was doing the right thing, but actually you called me out on it and was like, let's just tweak that. And suddenly it was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Okay. So when we talk ASD, and you've mentioned it a couple of times, like that hyper-focus mode, that is something that is common with people with ASD, that rigidity in thinking. But it's also common with people with emetophobia. So it's very important to understand that isn't a trait. It's not a bad trait to have. It's actually really, really helpful in certain situations. And this is one of those situations, because if you are able to hyper-focus on overcoming your emetophobia and put everything into practice, then you're going to find it easier
100%.
Than someone who hasn't got that hyper-focus mode. Right? So it's incredibly important that you see your autistic traits as strengths rather than weaknesses, and you learn to work with them as part of who you are, and celebrate them and put them to best effect, because you're not damaged. There's nothing wrong with you. And, as you're saying, there's a lot of discourse around autism, which is just completely false. You have the same amount of ability to overcome emetophobia as anybody else. And Rob, who has worked directly and indirectly with, I say Rob like people know who he is, Rob Kelly, the creator of the program, has worked directly and indirectly with thousands of emetophobes. And he does predict, because of all the data that we collect, that over half of those are neurodiverse. And he does say that the majority who are neurodiverse are able to go through the program easier, smoother, because they can switch their thinking. They have that rigidity in thinking and go, okay, well, I was thinking this way, now I'm thinking this way, so I'm going to think in this way. And that's what they do, which is really fabulous to hear, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And like, that's exactly right. We have the ability to make something our entire personality, which is really good when you're trying to thrive. It's like, right, every day, let's do this sort of thing. And, that those thinking styles can be very beneficial, but they can also be your downfall. So, and be the hurdles that you come across in the program. So I feel like there's a balance between the two.
Yes, definitely. So let's talk a little bit about your particular story, though, because when we worked together in April, or met in April, you didn't have a job, and you were living at home, and you were struggling with lots of things that emetophobes struggle with, eating out and travelling, and there was a lot going on for you. Now, fast forward to today, that's vastly different.
It's very different.
Very, very different. Do you want to explain the progress that you've made and all those different areas of your life that has completely changed now that you've been able to overcome?
Yeah, Yeah, I actually had a list on my phone of like all these things, and I ran out of space.
Did you?
So, yeah. So yeah, it's a sort of a wide sort of range of things. But one of the biggest limiting beliefs I had coming into this was like, I just can't get a job. Like the even idea of going to an interview was so terrifying. I was like, I wouldn't be able to do that. I wouldn't be able to do that without my chewing gum. I wouldn't be able to do that without these coping things. I would just have a panic attack, and I wouldn't be able to make it through the door. So I was like, it's just too. I just can't do it. And then fast forward to July, and I got my first ever job, which was not only my first ever job, but it was as a cleaning operative in a primary school. And I remember us having a discussion about it, and you were like, if you don't think you're thriving right now, you really need to reevaluate, because what emetophobe would pick being a school cleaner? And
absolutely.
And actually, on the back of that, I think one of the moments that I realized, oh, I am thriving now, or I'm not an emetophobe anymore, was we had to go over. I did the nursery every day with a colleague, and we go over there. And one night, one of us is on loos, and the other one's on floors, and then we change over. And I was on floors this night, and she just happened to come out and was like, "Oh, I think a kid's been sick in here. It's like, I'm going to have to clean it up." And my initial thought was not, "Oh my God," it wasn't run away. It was, damn, I wish I was on toilets tonight, because that would have been a great opportunity for me to challenge my emetophobia.
Great little challenge.
and I like stopped
amazing.
where I was for a moment. I was like, did I honestly just have that thought? Like, it was kind of one of those moments where I was like, okay, I'm definitely not an emetophobe now, because if I'm sat here thinking, oh, that would have been a great chance to really challenge myself in a positive way, and I'm disappointed that I didn't get that opportunity. I think that highlighted it for me. So
absolutely,
that was a huge step forward. I've since moved out. I've moved in with my partner, and that's been a very challenging process, because obviously there are so many things that I'm now like responsible for that I'd never had to think about before. There's loads of new scary sort of challenges, but I've coped so well with it. At the moment we're in a very old farmhouse, which is great in summer, not so great in winter. So at the moment we're really trying to find a way to conserve like heating, because otherwise it's just like throwing money out the window. So that's like a new challenge for me. I set up a women's and girls cricket team over the winter, and we had our first full season, and it was amazing. We had about 25 women signed up, and I've run all that myself. And actually, I don't think I've told you, because I think it was after our last catch up, but I actually won an award.
Fantastic! You've not told me that. Well done,
I won the Metro Bank Champion of Girls Cricket Award for Cumbria for my role in developing the women's game. So that was amazing. I won a trophy for it. And then I won a couple of awards at my local cricket club for the work I've been doing as well. So
congratulations, well done you.
Thank you. Awesome. It was like, so it's been phenomenal. And we've just started winter training again. And it's going really, really well. We're building on the success. We're moving from softball to hardball, but it's just, I went from when we started working together being really wanting to do it and really enjoying it when I was there, but creating so much anxiety beforehand, before each session, and really struggling to focus on anything else that day other than, right, I'm doing this evening. And now it's like I turn up and I just love it. There's no anxiety. It's just enjoyable. Awesome. It's taught me so much in terms of speaking to different people and trying new experiences and public speaking. I had to do a speech at the end of season presentation, and stood out on a balcony in front of people and do that. And I did it really well. I actually had people come up to me and compliment me and said that I was natural at public speaking, which was really lovely to hear, because I was like, I was very nervous. But it was really, really enjoyable. And just so those are sort of really big ones.
They're huge. And can I just butt in a tiny bit? Because when we started working together, you put so much effort into the social side of stuff, because you had limiting beliefs around that as well, tied in with your ASD, because you're thinking, well, I don't know. Because I remember having the conversations. I don't know whether I'm avoiding that social situation because of emetophobia or my ASD.
Yeah.
Am I ever going to feel comfortable in that social situation? Am I ever going to be able to pick up that skill set? And I remember you looking at moving houses and having to ring estate agents and energy companies and things like that, and then having to really work for that so you could feel confident and able to do that and put all the background, so it sounds almost miraculous, but there was a heck of a lot of work that you put in to overcoming that social anxiety and to get yourself to a position where you can enjoy, 'cause you said earlier in your story, from a very young age, when there was big crowds of people, it was back off. The amount of work that you've put in to get to this stage now where you can public speak and you can run a team of people is phenomenal. So you've got to take credit for that. And I think I just wanted to highlight how much energy and effort you've put into that. And that, it's one of those things, it's part of the triad, of ASD, the social side of things. And again, there's a lot of discourse around it. It's just you're wired differently, not necessarily. So, Meg is living proof of that, which is just beautiful. Sorry to interrupt.
No, it's fine. You're right. And like, there are certain things, like you mentioned, that things that I'm doing that I have processed, but like there's so much that I'm like, oh yeah, I didn't used to be able to do that. So like phone calls, I was like pathologically afraid of making phone calls. Like, when your mum says, oh, I need to phone up this company, but this is in your name, so you'll have to talk to them to give their permission. I would spend like all week dreading it, like just saying, yep, that's great, fine, and passing it back on to my mum, as a teenager or as a young adult or whatever. And now, like, I'm making phone calls all the time. I had to phone Sky Mobile the other day, and that was completely out of routine because I wasn't expected to do that. And, ASD, that hasn't completely gone away. I still struggle to transition sometimes when I've got a fixed routine, but it doesn't throw me off like for a whole day. Now I'm just like, okay, shake it off. Right, we'll do this.
Got the skills to deal with it and to cope with it.
I ordered a mattress when we moved out August, and it still hadn't arrived by October. 4 phone calls later, and it was like, for goodness sake. So that was a very lengthy ordeal, and trying to find people to talk to and ringing up and stuff. And that's just not something that I would have just left it. I wouldn't have dealt with it. It's things like that. And my partner and I went out to a cafe for coffee and cake like a couple of weekends ago, and it was it really enjoyable. Like, I'm enjoying these experiences now. I'm not just doing them but enjoying them as well. And one of the biggest things, like, going through it is that allowing yourself to still have these autistic traits and still have a different way of doing it, without seeing it as something you've got to fix in order to say you're thriving. So I have some noise dampening earbuds that I take, and I use those because they help. I know that if I was without them, I'd be able to cope. That's another thing, is like learning those coping skills. But I also know that using those day to day will avoid burnout, because I'm not having to take on that same sensory thing. It doesn't mean that, I can't be thriving until I ditch the earbuds. It's not that. And that perfectionist way of thinking is one of the biggest things that can hold you back as well. So allow yourself to have these things. As long as you're processing it in the right way and knowing that you can cope, and using them in helpful ways, and not in I wouldn't be able to cope with this if I didn't have this, and this.
Correct. And there was a few, in fact, the majority, the second half of the sessions, I would say, was very much perfectionist heavy, wasn't it? We're talking about
100%
that perfectionist lens holding you back. And you are right. Everybody's individual. Everybody with ASD is completely beautifully unique, but just like everybody who's neurotypical is completely and beautifully unique. You will have things that you prefer. There's nothing wrong with preferring things. There's nothing wrong with having quirks, as you beautifully described them, and catering to those. There's nothing wrong with that at all, because you're you, and and that's part of you, and that's you making your way through life and enjoying life, because you're going to ultimately enjoy life more if you've got your ear dampening headphones on.
Exactly.
And that's thriving. That's not a failure. That's not a failure to cope. That's just enjoying your life. And the beauty of what you said there was, I know I'd cope. If I didn't have them, I'd still cope. It would be harder. I'd have to put more effort in. It'd be more difficult, but I'd still cope. And that's such a powerful mindset.
Yeah, exactly. But like, actually coming off the back of explaining about the perfectionism, that is something that I really wanted to talk about, because like you said, that was like nearly because I knew the program inside and out by the time we sort of got to working with each other, I could highlight to you the areas that I knew were really holding me back. And one of them was social anxiety, and the other was perfectionism.
It was.
Perfectionism and black and white thinking, it was a big hurdle for me, and I wanted to talk about it because I think a lot of autistic people would relate to this. And that is, we have a real struggle picturing something we can't relate to. So if we've never been thriving, how can you picture what thriving is going to be like? And I'm sure a lot of anybody who listens to this will sort of be able to relate to it, in that you create this, you sort of fantasize about what thriving would be like. But by doing that, you're setting yourself unobtainable goals. And Rob Kelly, the creator of the program, has touched on this so many times, in that an emetophobe can, for a time, set unrealistic standards for themselves. Then they fail to meet them, and then it's like, well, I can't do it. So one of the biggest things I would get anyone listening to this, even if you think you've got this nailed, to sit and think about what you think perfectionism is, because I thought I had this nailed and I didn't. And this is one of the things that we really worked hard on. Perfectionism and the black and white thinking, really think about what you're trying to achieve, what you think thriving is like. Because even though I didn't think thriving was a life where it was totally happy all the time with no struggles, I was still creating this idea, this perfect feeling of not really struggling with nerves or anxiety or whatever. And that's what I thought thriving would be like. And the more I focused on that, the harder it was actually to make progress. And I still remember the moment it kind of changed for me and it clicked. And it was when I was talking to you about hosting a women's softball festival day in the summer. And I was saying, it's the first time I've done it. There were like 5 or 6 teams turned up. I was in charge of the whole day, the teams, the rota, the bar, the drinks, all this kind of stuff. I'd never done anything like this before. And we came back and we were talking about it, and I was speaking really positively about it, really internally. I did this, I did this, I did this, and next time I'm going to be able to do this. And you stopped me and said, if you did that day the same way all over again, be perfect. You don't need to change it. And what I didn't realize is that because I was speaking in a positive way about the further progress I could make, I thought I was speaking internally and I thought I was doing the right thing, but actually I wasn't. Because if we reflect on that day, it is a hell of a lot outside my comfort zone, as it would be for anyone who's not done that before. You are going to feel a bit uncomfortable. You're going to feel nervous. If you are striving to next time do that day again without those feelings, that is unhelpful. And that's actually going to hinder your progress, because you are then trying to be perfect and not feel discomfort. And that's not what thriving is. Thriving is being able to tolerate that discomfort and being able to enjoy it regardless. And I actually thought about this, and being sick itself, so the emetophobia, right, this is going to hinder you even more, because being sick is always going to feel a bit uncomfortable. It's always going to be unpleasant. It's not, people don't really like it, but it's done and dusted. If you are trying to go through the program and trying to perfect everything, so, I can go to the cafe without any nerves. I can go do this without any nerves. That's not a realistic expectation, because when you come to be sick eventually in your life or whatever, you are going to feel a bit uncomfortable and a bit sort of nervous, because that's your body's physiological response. But you can cope with it. That's why you need to learn to develop the coping skills, and not I can now do it without any nerves or discomfort. And I think that is the moment it clicked for me, is that I didn't realize that I could do these things and still feel a bit uncomfortable and be able to call it a success. And ironically, I made more progress forward when I allowed myself to feel uncomfortable. So I actually felt more comfortable and relaxed by allowing myself to feel uncomfortable, because 100%. That's what it is. And I think with the autism, the black and white thinking, picturing thriving and what it is, it's like it's different to how you're fantasizing about it. And the more realistic you can make that goal, the more attainable it is, and the more progress you're going to make.
Brilliant. Amazing. A great point, and one extremely well made. Well done, you. Very articulate. A great example of it. And I think anybody who's listening to this who has that perfectionist lens will go, yes, but I don't want to feel uncomfortable. But what Meg's describing is a human experience, and it's not one that the next time Meg does the same thing, she'll feel less uncomfortable because she's not thinking, right, okay, I've got to get rid of those nerves, because by focusing on that, you're still focusing on the nerves. If you focus on that day that you've just had, that, yep, I created a bit of discomfort, but I nailed it, everything went smoothly, I was really proud of myself, this is really great, you're building a belief for yourself that I can do it, I can be successful, I can enjoy it regardless. Therefore, the next time I'm not going to be focused on nerves, I'm not going to be focused on the discomfort, because I know I can handle it anyway. So you're less likely to create it. Whereas if you're going, okay, so it was great, apart from that, I still felt nervous then. And you go, okay, next time I'm not going to feel nervous then. You're focusing on the nerves. So it's still your focus. So it's a massively important point that you learn to tolerate and lean into your coping skills when it comes to a little bit of discomfort and a little bit of anxiety, because that is completely thriving. Because if you go, well, you know, whatever it might be, I could go skydiving tomorrow, and if I've never done it before, I'm going to create some discomfort about it. I am. But if I know I can cope with that discomfort, and I know it's just my body doing its thing, and I can get through it and it'll pass, I'm going to enjoy the experience. Likely. I've never done it, so I do, right? But arguably, I know I'm not going to panic, and I'm not going to process it in a way that was awful, and I can't do that because I can't tolerate that feeling. Having the skills and the ability to tolerate that discomfort is so powerful.
It's so powerful.
Because it's such a human experience, and we are not robots, and the Thrive program is not creating robots who don't feel things. You know, we create emotions. That's who we are. We're humans. So I love that. Well done, you. Brilliant. Brilliant.
And I don't want people to, I don't want people to misunderstand what I'm saying either, because I would not be sat here like praising the program if I was still experiencing these like high levels of discomfort.
No,
it's not about that. Like certain cricket stuff, like once I started not focusing on trying to rid myself of all the discomfort, I made so much more progress forward. And actually, for the most part, all the cricket stuff I love. There's no anxiety or nerves about at all. Correct. But this is the thing, because you will go through the program and over time find, I can now do these things with no discomfort or nerves. There are some things that I'm still feel a bit discomfort because you're just not in your comfort zone. It's just something that maybe you find particularly challenging, but they don't hold you back anymore. You don't spend time like, you know, every moment obsessing about it and thinking about it and worrying it. It's like, I've got to do that tomorrow, I'll get it done. Like, it's great, because that's what life is. You have your likes and your dislikes, but it's about not avoiding the things that you find uncomfortable and actually being able to do it. And I don't know, I'm like speaking for everyone here, but for me, I kind of get a kick out of it when I do something that I'm still a little bit nervous about, and I do it and I come out, I'm like on a high, and I'm like, see, I'm using those skills and I did it, and like, and that propels me forward. And then I often then do a few things in a row that are like outside my comfort zone, because you keep that ball going, you keep that momentum going.
Absolutely.
So there's that balance.
You build your sense of power. You know, people who regularly step out their comfort zone feel more powerful than people who don't. It's the way it works. And the more you do that and the more you get your kick out of it, and if that's the way you're processing, that's phenomenal. They're going to keep yourself thriving, and you're going to keep yourself feeling powerful, which is what we want to do. Which is awesome. I love that. Okay, so any last words of wisdom or any final points that you've got that you want to make that we've not already made around ASD, emetophobia, or anything else?
Nothing that springs to mind, I don't think. I think we sort of covered the main basis that, you know, that make your autism work for you if you are autistic. And even if you're listening to this and you're not autistic, there's, you know, I'm sure you can still relate to the majority of it. And so use your hyperfocus, you know, but the main takeaway is that you probably, if you use those skills, will find it easier to go through the program than someone who's not neurodivergent. So the main takeaway is you can be autistic and not be emetophobic.
You can.
I am living proof.
She is. She's here. Thank you so much. That's been so incredibly helpful. And you explain things so articulately, and it will be inspirational 100% inspirational. Your story is inspirational anyway, and then add ASD in there and it's just like mind-blowing. So fantastic. Well done you again.
Yeah.
And thank you again for being here, and yeah, enjoy a life of Emetophobia-Free and thriving. And
it's been my pleasure, I have to say.
Good. Fabulous.